The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the second day of this 7-day sesshin in October 2021, the predecessor to the 7-day sesshin in November, which will be only a few days after the end of this one, offering an incredible opportunity for deepening practice, sort of twice. It's more than twice, because when we have another sesshin, go to another sesshin, attend another sesshin, within days of having ended the first one, it's an exponential offering. And we can go much, much deeper. It's not just like you're going to continue because you've made the progress, so to speak. You reached a point in your practice at the end of the first sesshin that doesn't have a chance to sort of dissolve or diminish between then and the beginning of the next sesshin. There's just a small amount of space, and it makes a big difference, because then you can continue on from just about where you left off. And while it may sound daunting, in actuality, it's quite easy. It's amazing. And so we have planned also the January and February sesshins close together for the same reason. And we will be doing this many times in the future of Mountain Gate. Today, it was announced that Facebook is changing its name, apparently in an effort to avoid the stigma that it has taken on as a result of some of its, let's say, less than fortunate practices. And apparently Mark Zuckerberg, who is the CEO and founder of Facebook, is naming the new, whatever it is, they're demoting Facebook to be the equivalent of some of the other apps that are owned by Facebook, and the new mega social media company is now going to be called Meta, not Meta as in loving kindness, would that it were, but Meta as in beyond. Apparently, this is a Greek word meaning beyond. The reason I bring this up is because that's what our practice is about, going beyond our usual way of perceiving, our usual assumptions about ourselves. We set ourselves up in a kind of a straitjacket based on our experiences and the conclusions we've drawn about ourselves and others and life in general, as a result of those experiences. And that, simply put, brings about suffering. It's known psychologically that as soon as an infant is born, and I think in Buddhism we would say well before that, but let's just say, starting with this life, when an infant is born, it is interacted with in different ways by the people that are around it. Excuse me. And the infant learns things about itself, things about life as a result. If it has been a positive, a pleasant set of interactions, if when they've cried, somebody's been there and held them, changed them if they were wet, fed them if they were hungry, rocked them to sleep, and in other words, was really caretaking of them in a regular, ongoing way, then this infant begins to perceive that the world is a safe place, and they can kind of count on things being nice around them, sometimes with some exceptions, but generally so. But if the caretakers have whatever reason, sometimes it may have been the death of a parent or the illness of a parent that prevented that ongoing steadiness of caregiving, then a child develops a different view of the world, that things can't always be counted on. And then if a child has been really negatively treated, then of course the infant gets, as they grow up, they get the impression about the world being a dangerous place, and not just about the world. As children grow, they get an idea of the world they're living in, and they also get ideas of themselves, whether they are lovable, whether they are worth protecting, whether they are gifted, whether they are honored, or whether they are in danger a good part of the time, or whether it's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's danger, sometimes from the same people or people within the same circle, it can be loving. And all of this, because we are conditioned human beings, just as the Buddha said, we develop a self-image and a perception of the world. And we live from then on, or as it continues to grow and alter, because it will, we live in a world of our own creation, really. And interestingly enough, we tend to draw to ourselves experiences that will reinforce our worldview. But this is not permanent. This is alterable. And how to do it, how to change, how to let go. Because any kind of self-image, whether it's positive or negative or somewhere in between, it still defines our life. And it's like, in some ways, living in a cage. We can see through this conditioning, and we see through it by going beyond, not denying it. This is important. We don't deny that this is how it feels in the moment or how our experience was. We look beyond it to who we really are underneath the cloaking of the self-image. And I'd like to share with you then something of this book called It's Up to You. This is the teachings of Dzigar Kongtrul, a Tibetan Buddhist master. The subtitle is The Practice of Self-Reflection on the Buddhist Path. Self-reflection on the Buddhist path. There you go. And here he speaks about this in different words. So he's talking about looking for the mind. A questioning spirit. The great Indian Pandit Ayurveda once said that to merely question that things might not be as they seem can shape the very foundations of habitual clinging. And that is true. If we take things for granted, we assume that who we are is who we are, and we don't consider who we might really be according to the Buddhist teachings and the teachings of many great religions. In Christianity, it's said that God made man, and I would prefer to say human beings, in his own image. In other words, we are God. In Buddhism, our fundamental nature is perfect, wondrous, eternal, joyous, selfless, and pure. In Tibetan Buddhism is spoken of as a luminous transparency that is cognizant, can act, can speak, can do. And when we are able to recognize this true reality deeply enough, then we free ourselves from this prison of the self-image and a set of assumptions about who we are and the rigidity of having to live through that self-issue, the self-image. He continues. This questioning spirit is a starting point for self-reflection. Could it be that this tightly knit sense of self is not what it seems? Do we really need to hold everything together? And moreover, can we? Nervous breakdowns happen when people are no longer able to hold together the self-image. Is there life beyond self-importance? These kinds of questions open the door to investigating the cause of our pain. The actual practice of self-reflection requires us to step back, examine our experience, and not succumb to the momentum of habitual mind. This allows us to look without judgment at whatever arises. And that is a very difficult thing to do for many people, to look without judgment. We are so accustomed to judging ourselves and consequently to judging everybody and everything else. And that comes out of this assumption of a self-image, of a permanent fixed being that we are, which we're not. And this goes directly against the grain of our self-importance. We can feel self-important even as we're negative about ourselves. There's some sense of power in condemning ourselves, castigating ourselves. There's an investment in a self-image, whether it's a positive one, a negative one, or somewhere in between. And yet, this is the cause of our suffering. And furthermore, we can become free of it if we work on going beyond that meta word again. Questioning. Open to the possibility that maybe who we think we are isn't who we really are. And the truth is, it really isn't who we are. Self-reflection is the common thread that rings throughout traditional lineage of Buddhist practice. It also takes us beyond the boundaries of formal practice. We can bring the questioning spirit of self-reflection to any situation at any time. And a particularly effective time to do that is when we have a sense of self. And this often happens if we're embarrassed or we're shown up or somebody says something that hurts us, then there's a feeling in our body. And if we tune into that sensation, and psychology supports this, if we tune into the sensation of that feeling of whatever it is, you know, if you have to name it, it is embarrassment, it's rage, it's anger, it's denial, it's self-flagellation, it's anguish. If you instead of naming it, instead of racing up into your head and putting words to it and avoiding feeling it, because that's what we do, because the feeling of it is not comfortable. If instead you go into the sensations in your body, and here we have to differentiate between feeling and sensation, because feeling is a word that can be confused with emotion. I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, or whatever. We're talking about sensation. We're talking about whether your body is filled with a shivering electricity at a given moment, whether somebody says something to you and you get chills. It's a very different, it's simply a felt sense in your body. And within that felt sense, because it's not just about feeling the felt sense, it's about going into the sensation of the felt sense and wordlessly searching for a me that is feeling that. It's an incredibly effective practice. And you do it again and again and again whenever the opportunity arises. And often the opportunity does arise fairly frequently. And it is amazing how we gradually become, little by little, free of the tyranny of the self-image when we work like this. It's an incredibly powerful practice. Let's see what else he has to say. This next section is called Our True Face. If we look at our habitual mind without deception or judgment, which is not so easy to do, we will see beyond it to who we truly are, beyond the self, quote unquote, and what it does or doesn't want, beyond the self that is constantly fighting for or tugging at the world, lies our true nature and our true face. And this is why when the monk, former General Monk, was chasing after the sixth patriarch who had just received the patriarchy and its standards, the bowl and the robe passed down from the Buddha, then he finally encounters him, and they had this discussion after the monk tried to lift up the robe and the bowl, which had been placed on a rock, and he couldn't. Suddenly he was unsure of what he was really doing. After all, the robe and the bowl had been given to Huineng, not stolen. Some of the monks thought it was stolen. They didn't think a layman was worthy of becoming the sixth patriarch. And there you are with a big fat set of self-images in pursuit of the new sixth patriarch. And when Monk Myo caught up with him and could not lift the robe and the bowl, he cried out, layman, I only came for the teaching. I didn't really come for the robe and the bowl. And so Huineng, who was still ordained, stepped out from where he was hiding and said, I will teach you, but first we need to do some zazen. And so they sat in meditation. And the monk had been so focused on tracking him. And who knows what his previous practice experience had been. At any rate, he was able to focus quite deeply. And after a point, Huineng said, okay, now when you were pursuing me, thinking of neither good nor evil, so focused on simply finding me, tracking me, where then was your original face? And we call that koan your face before your parents were born, your original face. And that is a very effective koan, because most people don't think about having previous lives. And even so, they think, well, and I was a French general, or I was Cleopatra, or I was a Russian princess, or something like that. Or I was hanged on the cross. I mean, we have ideas about things that fit our self-perception. That original face is right here now. And you can open to it. Here's some more of what he says. If we look at our habitual mind without deception or judgment, we will see beyond it to who we truly are, beyond the self and what it does or doesn't want, beyond the self that is constantly fighting or tugging at the world, lies our true nature and true face. This is the face of our natural state, free from the struggle to become what we are not. It's the face of a potentially realized being whose wisdom, qualities, and courage are beyond measure. That's you. That's each of us, no matter what our history. Seeing both our deeper potential and our hindrances, we begin to understand the cause of our suffering, and we can begin to do something about it. And it's the something about it somehow naturally unfolds as we continue to tune in and search wordlessly for that original face. Anytime any feeling arises in us that would seem to identify us, then even the act of doing that begins to uncover it little by little. This original face is not something that you can put into words. It's impossible. It's beyond words. And yet it is the most real thing there is. And as we begin to uncover it, as we begin to let go our self-image, our ideas about ourselves, our life changes. This is what our practice is about. And I think that's enough. Hopefully this will inspire you to really dive in, because it's a very simple practice and it's incredibly effective. What we are doing, what everyone is doing, no matter what our practice focus is trying to uncover our true self, which, in other words, is our original face. And we can, if we persist. And of course, along the way, we'll find out where we're caught. But gradually, the attachments will thin out. So, be inspired by Mark Zuckerberg's renaming of Facebook. Meta, the Greek word for beyond, and go beyond and uncover who you really are. and become free. So thank you for listening, and we'll stop now and get to work going there.